Hello, I'm Doug Musio. This is part one of a special Middle East edition of City Talk. The Iranian president in New York, Gaza as an enemy entity, political assassination and presidential selection in Lebanon, Israeli airstrike against Syria, arms race in the Persian Gulf, oil, oil, oil. Joining me once again to talk about the Middle East is a distinguished Middle East hand, Richard Murphy, former U.S. ambassador to Mauritania, Syria, the Philippines, and Saudi Arabia. He has served as U.S. Secretary of State for Near Eastern and Asian Affairs, and he has been named Career Ambassador for the United States and was the Senior Fellow for the Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations for 15 years. Ambassador Murphy is a frequent TV commentator and widely consulted expert, and he provides me my semi-annual postdoc in Middle East politics. Welcome back.
Real pleasure.
I was looking back at our March interview and looking at my intro, and the intro was virtually the same. Are things not changing? Is it remaining the same?
Well, you and I are 6 months older, but the Middle East doesn't change that fast. The problems are tough ones, and it seems at times that those who said there are problems without solutions just might have a point and can only be managed. Americans don't like that. I didn't like that in my own career, but I must say as time keeps passing,
so it's not,
you wonder.
It's not only my impression that things are moving very slowly in a positive direction and in some cases moving in a not so positive direction. Yeah. It's okay. Yeah. Before we go to the Middle East, let's just be in New York for a quick moment. The Iranian president is in New York, visited Colombia, big brouhaha, spoke before the National Press Club and is talking before the United Nations. Secretary of Rice said it was a travesty that he wanted to visit Ground Zero. He was prevented from doing so. What's the policy here? What does this visit represent, both to Iran, to the United States, to the UN? What's the implication of all of this?
Well, I think that his appearance up at Columbia, his interviews with our media, have been very useful airing of the Iranian problem. And our appreciation of that problem may be a little better as a result of this visit. Now, it doesn't mean we understand or we welcome his views at all. But I think Columbia University, as the host, did itself proud the other day by letting him sound off in his usual fashion and be challenged and have to answer, which regrettably was in his usual fashion. He didn't answer the questions that were put to him. Right.
But he is appealing insofar as that he spars. He came back. I mean, when President Bollinger, which I thought gave a very hard-hitting and quite unusual, introduction, and the president himself sort of stepped back and said, wow, is this how you treat a guest in your house? He's very bizarre in terms of his ability to make rational statements and then flying off. And is it simply because he's got multiple audiences and I'm not really his audience?
Well, I think it's, first of all, he came across as a well-practiced devotee of American sparring on television, the various talk shows, which is unusual for a leader from the region. He obviously enjoys punching back and thinking he's scored a knockout each time. So we heard much about the problems of dealing with his mentality, where he's welcomed in the Iranian scene and more broadly in the third world is defiance. Mm-hmm. He's telling the Americans how to get off, and they get a kick out of that. That doesn't mean it advances their understanding of the problems at all, but it was kind of feel good, like Chavez was when he was at the UN earlier, speaking about President Bush as the devil. That didn't help international understanding or Venezuelan-American relations, but I think it's a useful experience, and he has a number of critics at home, and this didn't make them any less critical of him.
Okay, so there was a domestic audience, and the reaction there would be multitudinous and varied. Okay. Yeah. Let's go to Iraq. Let's go to the Middle East. Since our last chat in March, you've been back to the Middle East, and you met in Beirut with a variety of Iraqi political personalities. Talk about those conversations, what they signified to you about what's happening now, and what it might portend.
Yeah. Well, it was a meeting of what is called Track 2 diplomacy. It's not officials on either side, except a number of them were members of the Iraqi parliament.
And people on the other side were government officials like
real spread of representation from the Iraqis, those who were in exile today in Syria and Jordan, who couldn't operate wouldn't be acceptable back in Baghdad at this date. Kurds, Shia, Sunni, from as many factions as we could assemble that we felt representative.
Now, who's we?
It's the Institute for Sustained Dialogue under the Kettering Foundation. They've had these efforts at trying to find ways of national reconciliation between the Soviets and Americans in the past, between those fighting a civil war in Central Asia at one point. It's a slow process. This was the first session, and it was unusual in that you can't avoid realizing you are the 800-pound gorilla in the cage. It's not that the Iraqis have problems between themselves. They've got big problems with the United States. Some, like the Kurds, calm, saying, "You're welcome, please stay, you've been a big help to us." To the others, some of whose rhetoric was pretty rough, and you caused all these problems. We didn't have sectarianism before you came into the scene, which is nonsense.
Right.
But there was a lot of anger, and the point of these meetings is you keep the same group together, try to get beyond the rhetoric to get down to the bedrock of, okay, there's problems. What sort of Iraq do you look forward to? What are you willing to give, to accommodate to the others? We can all hear the problems. Now, let's get away from the emotion.
Okay, and were they able to get away from the emotion? And if they did, what was the thing that was what was left? What was the residue on the conference room table?
They did not get away from the emotion. We were together for about sessions over two and a half days, but it was the first session. I emphasize, and this is typical. There's a great deal of anger to vent. And the hope is that as this continues with the same group over a period of perhaps we'd like a couple of years, meeting every 4 or 5 months, that more thinking will come forth as to what they might do on reconciliation.
When are you going back?
Going back, we'll have a meeting in November.
Of the same group?
Of the same group, as much as possible, yeah.
Okay.
One of them is dead now, was killed, and it's,
real attrition.
Yeah. Yes.
What was left? What was your sense of what was there, and what were the potentials, and how in a sense did that correlate to what we're hearing either from Petraeus or Crocker or the critics?
Well, the one thing that came out of that meeting was a conviction that somehow Iraq could stay together. It wasn't going to end up as 3 separate states.
Okay.
But there was going to have to be a lot more trust, a lot more confidence built in the others' intentions before that could be accomplished.
And did they see this as possible? And what would the American role be in fostering and facilitating that, if that's what we want?
Well, while they represented a big spread of political opinion, again, there was some agreement that we want you out, but not today and not tomorrow. You will leave a bigger mess if you leave quickly than
that's a consensus.
Than you have created. I mean, again, it was this theme: we got along. Okay, he was a vicious dictator, but we had some security. We could predict what tomorrow was going to bring. We can't today. So you brought us anarchy, you brought us chaos, and it's kind of like there was a scab over some old wounds that go back the 1,200 years,
right.
the millennia. And our army came in and scraped the scabs off those wounds. So it's going to take time to settle back.
So, given your history and knowledge, where are we? It's extremely fluid, and prediction's obviously impossible. But given your best judgment, looking at it right now, what seems to be the trajectory or the possible trajectories?
Well, the administration, represented by General Petraeus, Ryan Crocker, the ambassador, certainly were featuring the need for the surge in our troops and the fact that it is accomplishing something. I don't think they exaggerated what it was accomplishing. And I think if you read back over the hearings, they were pretty realistic
And nuanced.
Yeah, and nuance gets lost in the retelling
Right.
by the media and the analysis.
But what they were detailed and nuanced about, did that get at the central problem, which the National Intelligence Estimate says is the failure of the Iraqi government and the society to produce results given this calmer on-the-ground reality?
To produce results, the hope. And some say hope is not a strategy. Hope is not even a trajectory. You can't build just on that. But they keep pointing, and they being the officials, to the gains in stability where they have had enough troops to bring it about.
Right.
And they hope for enough time that when they do leave, are we talking a year? Are we talking 2 years? Whatever. Some say it's a 10-year affair, and they point you to Malaysia, they point you to Northern Ireland. When you get into this kind of civil war mentality, it can take a decade. But can we be there that amount of time?
The question is a domestic political question.
Our domestic political.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What happens in the next 6 months? What happens in the next year? It's just a continuation. But it seems what you're telling me is that we're learning. The U.S. is learning. We're learning things that, as you've said before, we should have learned before. That there is some kind of understanding of the society that we didn't have when we walked in.
When we invaded and smashed a government and a whole political structure, we were suddenly in charge of an Arab country, a major Arab country, about which we knew less than we knew about any other major Arab country. That's because we physically weren't there. We weren't there as diplomats. Our intelligence, our military attachés weren't there, developing a network of contacts. And Saddam's thought control, he isolated the people that we were able to have there. But remember, we were only there 8 years out of, I think it's 36 years before we invaded.
Right.
Okay. Now the lieutenant, now the junior political officer from the embassy, now the sergeant is out there learning firsthand about the grudges, the tensions in Anbar province, in Fallujah, in Basra. It would have been nice had we had some of that insights before, and it's being earned with our blood and their blood.
And my further question is, how is it being institutionalized, or is this lost as these folks move? Their tours are over, etc. I mean, does the Army, the Marines, the military in general have this institutional memory to be able to carry it through? I mean, you may not know the answer to that question, but that's the question.
There is no answer to the question yet, because it hasn't taken shape institutionally in Baghdad. Yes, there's a government, there's a cabinet, there's a parliament. But you got to look behind the names and the titles. Why is he there? What kind of job is he doing? What kind of job is he able to do?
Right.
We have cut pieces off of every Iraqi leader that's been in charge under elections run under the auspices of the American security. Thanks to the American security, they've had elections. So anybody that leads Iraq today is still going to be considered an American puppet by many of his critics.
Okay.
That's a reality.
Let's go to oil. It's been in the news. Alan Greenspan essentially argues in his new memoir that the Iraq War, I'm saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil. So this weapons of mass destruction, this democracy in the Middle East, the substratum of all this is oil.
Well, would we be interested in the Middle East to the degree we are, with the keenness of interest, if it wasn't for oil? Probably not.
Right. No.
There are people dying in many conflicts around the world where we don't invest the energies, much less the troops and the billions of dollars. Mm-hmm. But to say oil is driving it, I'd accept that argument more as it applied back in '91 at the time of Desert Storm.
Mm-hmm. Which was direct with Kuwait.
Well,
right.
When Saddam took over Kuwait,
right.
and had he stayed there, could have dominated the oil production and pricing of the world through Kuwait, intimidating the Saudis, intimidating even the Iranians if
right.
he had been victorious.
Right.
And that was, I think Greenspan had his statements applied better to '91 than they did to '03. By '03, Saddam was crippled. Now, that doesn't diminish the importance of oil in the international economy or the need for us to get moving, which I don't see it happening. I hear still the same speeches out of our Congress, out of our political leaders. We've got to have alternative fuels right. and get rid of the dependence. Are we ready to devote the money to that yet? I'm not persuaded.
Nor I, in fact. There was a less noticed piece by John Nichols on an agreement between the Kurdish government and Hunt Oil that seems to suggest, to buttress Greenspan's point of view, it seems as if we are attempting to privatize at least some of the Iraqi oil supplies. And that was supposed to be the glue as well as the lubricant, if I may use that term, for the development of this Iraqi state. If it's not going to them and it's coming to us, it's not working.
Yeah. Well, one of the early actions when there was the direct public authority accepted by our public and by the Iraqi public that every sparrow that fell was because of American policy. We had a policy in '03-04 which was not against privatization, but it was to respect the central authority of the Iraqi government, of the Iraqi oil minister, to set guidelines and to get the revenue to the central government.
Okay.
And the Iraqi leadership has said this agreement with Hunt Oil in Kurdistan is illegal. Now, what are they going to do about that? I don't know. Hunt Oil has got to have that statement in mind, because throughout the region, there's the assumption on the part of the public, the Arab public, the Iranian public, that the only interest we have is oil, and that this is the national patrimony. It's our oil. We're going to control it. So we didn't break up the oil ministry or restructure the oil ministry back in the first years of the occupation.
Okay. You mentioned that the Iraqis have declared this agreement illegal, but it's going to be ignored. We had this Blackwater incident with these mercenaries where the Iraqi government said they could no longer do what they were doing, and the American government, in fact, countermanded that, and they're there. So where is the Iraqi Authority, and how far does it go, or does the United States have a veto over every significant action?
Well, that significant action, if it had been implemented, would have locked down our whole diplomatic effort in Iraq. They would never have left the green zone if they could not be escorted. And the U.S. military isn't in a position, given the tightness of its presence in Iraq, to provide that security. So that's why we've contracted out to these private groups.
This sounds like one of my junior high school lessons about the dirty British and their German and foreign mercenaries. Is there some kind of perverse parallel here, that we are an imperial power using mercenaries? It sounds bad to me.
I know. And it just sort of grew like Topsy in the shade over the last 20 years. It became government policy to contract out as much as possible and then have the combat forces and the logistic forces that had to be under direct military discipline and control. It was privatizing, and it's got big, big drawbacks. And I think the Blackwater example is a reminder that this isn't going to work in the long run. And these fellows have done enormously valuable work, as the ambassador in Baghdad said.
Right.
And they lost their own people defending our officials as they tried to move around Baghdad, much less around Iraq.
Okay, let's go back again to Iran for a moment. We talked about the president's speeches at Columbia and at the National Press Club and at the UN, but look at Iran as a regional power. Is Iran the threat to its neighbors that its neighbors seem to perceive, and a threat to American interests? I mean, let's look at it in terms of, sort of global power right here. What are their designs and what are their capabilities?
The Iranian desire to be recognized as the or at least a major regional player is longstanding. It goes back certainly through the whole period of the Shah Pahlavi. The Iranians are convinced their standing as a country, their population, their resources, their history and culture entitle them to the respect of a major regional player. And as the Shah jockeyed with certain of the Arab Gulf states, and certainly as the Iraq-Iran showed, the Iranians, although that's not the best example of the Iraq-Iran war because that was started by Iraq.
Right.
But the Iranians were determined to win, to destroy Saddam. It didn't work, but the desire to be recognized and respected as the major regional power is alive in Tehran.
But in fact, they are confronted. I mean, if we look at the Shia Sunni split, I mean, you've got Shia Iran and you've got Sunni Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, etc. Yeah. You've got this deep cultural religious split as well as potential military conflict. Now, how are the folks on the other side of the water viewing Iran? I mean, are they, it seems as if, and we're going to probably continue this on our next show, you've got an arms race in that area of the world. The United States, I think, is talking about $20 billion worth of modern armaments to Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, etc., to counter Iran, and then they're giving $30 million to Israel. Are we billions rather? Are we creating an arms race, or is this necessary for deterrence? Enlighten me.
It is a question of deterrence. It's a message to Tehran. On the one hand, we're not leaving. You're not pushing us out, and it's a message of reassurance to the Arab leaders on that side of the water that they have support and that they can count on us for support. Now, the downside is it is an arms race, although the amount of assistance coming to Iran in terms of arms is minimal. Not minimal, but it's not as significant as what we are providing in quality and quantity to the Saudis, to the Emirates, to Kuwait. Mm-hmm. I think those are the main beneficiaries, and Egypt also. That said, is pumping in arms the way to help stability, or is it just feeding a flame which will grow brighter and hotter than ever?
And in particularly since part of the contracts say that something like 70-something% of the arms have to be purchased from Americans' arms manufacturers. So there's this economic development element of it as well that we're boosting American industry by selling arms.
Wasn't it Eisenhower way back talked about the military industrial
complex? Yeah. Thank you very much. Before we leave this segment, Iran and the atomic weaponry. The IAEA made an agreement in September to develop a work plan to talk with Iran, the Islamic Republic. Where are we with that? Are they building it? Are they not building it?
Well, I don't think any of us outside the...
And if they are, excuse me, and if they are, what are the implications?
Well, as I say, nobody outside knows just where they are.
Right.
There's a lot of suspicion, hey, they could have a bomb in 2 years. No, it's 10 years. And you've had Ahmadinejad saying again and again, as he has in New York, we don't want a bomb. What does a bomb accomplish? Well, a bomb is deterrence of wild, mad dog Americans out to destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's in their mindset. The bomb is prestige. Hey, look what we have done in science. We're world beaters, or we're full competitors with the major powers. And yet he's saying flatly, we're not interested. They are at least interested in having nuclear capability. They say just for civil purposes. But a lot of countries have taken a program just far enough to be known as having the potential to have weapons at the end of the road, but not making the final steps, which could be, the concern is, taken very quickly should they decide to go to weapons. But right now, it's I think it's just useful to them.
And it scares all the rest of us.
It scares everybody, yeah.
And that's its intention to a certain extent.
Of course it is, yeah.
Well, being afraid concludes the first part of these two-part shows on the Middle East. Join Ambassador Richard Murphy and me as we continue to discuss and survey the problems and prospects in the Middle East. Hello, I'm Doug Musio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.tv. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.